Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York.
One of the most famous names in the hip-hop world is now facing 3 charges in federal court. Many people have come forward in recent months to accuse Sean Diddy Combs of abuse, sex trafficking, drug possession, and more, but now the federal government is getting involved and promising to bring down the rap mogul's alleged criminal empire. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
This office is determined to investigate and prosecute anyone who engages in sex trafficking, no matter how powerful or wealthy or famous you may be. No one should doubt our commitment on that.
He done. He got Professor Xavier on him. That's it.
Crime world. And today, it all centers around Sean Diddy Combs. And all of these details and filings in his new criminal case, and we're going to break it down for you right now, give you everything you need to know. So, the Southern District of New York is promising justice for multiple victims who say that rapper, producer, businessman Combs used his power, influence, and wealth to intimidate them into doing his bidding, whether that was obtaining drugs or performing sexually or cleaning up after apparent sex acts. Now, we've of course been reporting on Combs for months here on Sidebar. In November of last year, Cassandra Ventura, Cassie, Combs' ex, filed a huge lawsuit against him, claiming that he abused her physically, sexually, emotionally for years before she was finally able to get away. Now, Combs denied everything she had to say in her filing. He settled the lawsuit with her just one day after it was filed, but we know that set off a chain reaction. Multiple other lawsuits against him and even against his son were filed, alleging sexual abuse, sex trafficking, illegal narcotics possession, violence. Then, in March of this year, Homeland Security agents, they show up at Combs' homes in both Miami and Los Angeles, search warrants in hand. They raided both locations, seemingly collecting a huge amount of evidence, which we will get through in a moment. And we learned at the time that this was connected to a sex trafficking investigation out of the Southern District of New York, but we didn't know all the exact details. Well, you fast forward to this week, and Combs was officially arrested Monday night at the Park Hyatt Hotel in New York out in Manhattan. According to his defense team, he had been booked there since September 5th, that was nearly 2 weeks ago, and he was in town in anticipation of the charges being filed, which is important because now that Combs has been arrested and charged, he says this is an example to show he's not a flight risk. He's been cooperative. However, when U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, again from the Southern District of New York, held a press conference and was asked about Combs' cooperation in this case, he seemed skeptical.
Let me just say this. I think that generally,
who seems skeptical?
With increasing frequency, just say this. I think that
who's talking?
This case from the Southern, he's been cooperative. However, when U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, again from the Southern District of New York, held a press conference and was asked about Combs' cooperation in this case, he seemed skeptical.
Let me just say this. I think that generally, with increasing frequency, the word cooperative or cooperating has taken on tremendous elasticity and it no longer really bears any relation to what the word means when we use it in a very specific context. So responding to lawful process and the like does not qualify as cooperation when we use that term here.
What we do know is we are now getting a look at what the prosecution believes they can prove. And that brings me to this major indictment against Sean Combs. So, prosecutors filed documents in federal court that lay out the accusations against Combs and his associates. Although, to be clear, Combs is the only one named in this filing for now. He faces 3 charges: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Now, during a hearing on Tuesday, Combs entered a not guilty plea to every charge. And if he is convicted of all charges, Combs faces a minimum of 15 years in prison with the possibility that the 54-year-old could spend the rest of his life behind bars. That's what we're talking about here. So we're going to break down each of these counts for you, as well as more on why Combs says he should be allowed out on bail while he waits trial. And let's start with the indictment. It's 14 pages. Jam-packed with information. I want to hit the highlights. So first, right out of the gate, the government lays out some pretty damning accusations. Quote, For decades, Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. P Diddy, Diddy, a.k.a. P D, Love, they, throughout the course of this indictment, refer to him by his many monikers, the defendant abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Which brings me now to count one: arson.
They trying to say Bad Boy was a criminal enterprise?
Shit crazy. And attempted to
wow.
engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice.
They're trying to cook.
Bribery and obstruction of justice. Which brings me now to count one: racketeering conspiracy. So the main idea here is that there is a criminal agreement, an agreement to engage in racketeering. And racketeering is when there is a criminal enterprise, it's like organized crime, a grouping of people who break the law. They commit crimes. Now, it doesn't need to be Sean Combs Breaks the Law LLC. You don't need an official company. Just an organized group of people, organized crime. And a criminal enterprise is supposed to have a common goal. So whether it was to benefit financially, whether it was to satisfy Sean Combs' sexual desires, whether it was to protect him, there has to be a common goal in mind. We saw this, we're seeing this actually, I should say, in the Young Thug trial out of Georgia. Big thing for the prosecution is they have listed a number of different crimes. They're trying to say this wasn't done in an individual capacity, but it was done to further that gang. Similar idea here. Okay. Now, also, as you're going to see here, in a racketeering case, there are numerous predicate crimes. These are underlying crimes that Combs is not specifically charged with, like arson or kidnapping or forced labor, but they are crimes under the umbrella of the larger criminal enterprise. By the way, I should tell you, the racketeering allegations that we see in this indictment are very consistent with the allegations put forward by Rodney Little Rod Jones, Combs' former producer, who was one of the people that filed a sexual assault lawsuit against him and said there were violations of racketeering law. In fact, although no one is specifically named in this indictment, you can kind of see who those alleged victims of Combs are, their allegations, that they were the basis for the charges here, especially Cassandra Ventura. Because we all know that when that video back in 2016 was released by CNN a few months ago.
Wild.
I think I read something yesterday that said that this scene right here was she was trying to run away from him and a sex worker in the room. And then he had a text message saying, I just wanted my clothes. I think I read something. The police is here. You just gonna leave me alone like this? But she was just trying to get away from that situation. She was trying to run away from
Sean Combs purportedly beating Cassandra Ventura in a hotel elevator bank. That was publicized for the whole world to see, and he apologized for on Instagram. That is mentioned specifically in this indictment. Now, reading from the indictment, it says, quote, "The defendant and others, known and unknown, participated in unlawful and other activities related to the conduct of the Combs Enterprises affairs. These individuals included certain Combs business employees, such as members of Combs security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and high-ranking supervisors, as well as other close associates of Combs." Now, one of the most startling examples of Combs' alleged control over those around him came from the description of apparent sex parties called freak-offs. This is something that Ventura and others alleged in their lawsuits. What are they? Well, the indictment says Combs and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise wielded the power and prestige of Combs' role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs' orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers that Combs referred to as, among other things, freak-offs. Freak-offs were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, I'm not going to say the next part, basically pleasured himself during, and often electronically recorded. In arranging these freak-offs, Combs, with the assistance of members and associates of the Combs enterprise, transported and caused to be transported commercial sex workers across state lines and internationally. Freak-offs occurred regularly, sometimes lasted multiple days, and often involved multiple commercial sex workers. So this is also kind of a flavor of the sex trafficking charge, which we'll get to a little bit later.
Yo, I seen a video before. I don't know if you saw this shit. It was somebody in like an interrogation room talking about just random. He wasn't even there for that situation, but he was bringing up Diddy. Do you know Sean Combs?
Yeah. P Diddy, whatever you call himself these days. Yeah, go ahead.
The man who allegedly opened fire inside of one of former President Donald Trump's Florida hotels several years ago made some wild statements to law enforcement in his interviews, saying he was a sex
long ago
slave for Sean
when that
Diddy
shit
Combs.
happened.
Well, now that federal investigators have raided two of the rapper's homes and an arrest and indictment in a sex trafficking operation could be imminent, the man's comments sound a little less crazy. We'll talk about it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime.
It's funny, it's the same dude.
Claims of all this sexual homes. These new versions. Combs allegedly Diddy. Let me give you a little background. Now, you remember back in 20...
More than, I believe, two uniformed officers, in addition to the unarmed security guard who threatened to kill as well. And there was damages greater than $1,000 at the Trump National Doral, because it says it was over $30,000. So,
this is when he starts to create a web of people that he believes are involved in a larger conspiracy.
I had settlement with Sean, okay? And he belongs to that agenda. That's why he's so famous. They land all the contracts. It's these attorneys, which are Mark Garagos and Ben Mercedes. Ben Mercedes worked for Bad Boy Entertainment for 4 years and worked for Hillary Rodman for 5, okay?
So Mark Garagos and Ben Mercedes might be names you recognize.
See that shit, bro?
He was people and stuff, and I was like a sex slave, okay? For them, that's what I was. That's all right?
That is eerie.
Crazy.
Wow.
During freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to victims, in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes, unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of victims engaging in sex acts with commercial sex workers. After freak-offs, Combs and the victims typically received IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use.
That is
then
crazy.
More details about what Combs expected his employees to do before, during, and after these sessions.
Now, Combs did not do this all on his own. As I mentioned, Combs has been charged with RICO conspiracy. He used his business and employees of that business and other close associates to get his way.
Bro, they said they found 1,000 bottles of baby oil, bro.
1,000 bottles of baby oil, lube, and you getting so overly exerted. The man got IVs. You need IV to recover you, to keep you going for days.
Those individuals allegedly included high-ranking supervisors in the business, personal assistants, security staff, and household staff. The indictment alleges that those individuals facilitated the freak-offs. They booked the hotel rooms and stocked them with the supplies, including drugs, baby oil, personal lubricant, extra linen, and lighting. When the hotel rooms got damaged, they helped clean it up. They arranged for victims and commercial sex workers to travel for the freak-offs, and they delivered large quantities of cash to Combs to pay for the commercial sex workers.
According to the indictment, in or
like,
about...
Why all that?
Crazy, bro.
Like, why?
March of 2024, during searches of Combs' residences in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles.
1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant, bro.
That is wild.
California
Like,
law
why?
enforcement seized various
That's a lot of people that
free-off
can't even
supplies,
count to
including
1,000.
narcotics and more than
Why?
1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. Wow, you're
More
talking
than
about
1,000.
physical evidence here
1,000
to
bottles
prove
of
these
baby
claims.
oil.
Now, federal prosecutors allege that Combs used the threat of violence as well as actual assaults to keep his alleged victims in line. The indictment reads, quote, Combs maintained control over his victims through, among other things, physical violence, promises of career opportunities, granting and threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive means, including tracking their whereabouts, dictating the victim's appearance, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying them with controlled substances.
What?
Yo,
Combs maintained control of his victims through, among other things, physical violence, promises of career opportunities, granting and threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive means, including tracking their whereabouts, dictating the victims' appearance, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying
Combs
them with
maintained
controlled
control of his
substances.
victims through, among
Yo.
other things,
minus the underage. This is getting R. Kelly-ish.
During and separate from freak-offs, Combs, among other things, hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims at times by the hair. These assaults often resulted in injuries that took days or weeks to heal. Combs also threatened victims.
What was the name of that show when he was treating them like that? Those people that was trying to get a band.
They're in.
Oh, they're making a band?
Bro, remember that shit, the cheesecake?
Bro,
careers and livelihoods, including if they resisted participating.
what really
in
happened to them?
So a majority
Damn.
of that indictment covers that first
What was
count,
the name of that show
racketeering
when he
conspiracy.
was
Now I
like
want
that?
to talk quickly about the other two counts that he faces. So count 2 is a charge of sex trafficking of a victim by using force or coercion or fraud to have that person.
I was just gonna say, how you see that's where it gets weird, because it's like he's threatening these people with opportunities and stuff like that. So technically they have a choice, but then it's Diddy. So it's like I'm right here. Like I don't know. I know I would have been.
I was
like,
just
nah,
gonna
I'm good.
say.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I feel like
That's
they had a choice, because if it were me, I'm like, no, I ain't fucking doing that shit.
threatening
You see how many people do interviews and they be like
that, so
I seen Marlon Wayans do an interview. He was like, yeah, I go to Diddy. I've been to Diddy parties, but I leave early. I just go for the hors d'oeuvres and shit.
I don't know. I know.
Yeah.
Like, I ain't here for all
And
that.
then Cat Williams even said,
They had a
got
choice
to
because
tell him
it was
no.
me. I ain't fucking doing
But-
that shit. Like, you see how many people do interviews and they be like,
Overall, like,
Marlon Wayans do an interview. He was like,
I mean, the drugs and stuff is something, but
I leave early. I just go to nerves and shit.
overall, like, he don't really have nothing that he did other than he's just really freaky.
Tell him no.
Yeah, but is that with all that power, he could be a big influence. All that money.
Unless they could prove that he drugged people against their will and put them in these positions against their
Which
will.
I'm sure they are, because they wouldn't arrested him like that if they didn't. And deny bond.
Engage in commercial sex acts that are either for money or something of value is promised or given. And there were allegations that Combs had made promises of opportunities and so forth to get what he wanted. And he's also charged with count 3, which is related to the transportation of people for purposes of prostitution. Now, quick side note about this. This is a comprehensive indictment, but it doesn't have
I seen a video too where the dude was like, I don't know if it was real or not, but he was like, he Diddy neighbor, and 3 a.m. Diddy be having a bus full of chicks coming to his crib.
a lot of details about what evidence prosecutors have
A long day.
prove all of this. It also doesn't include every allegation that has been asserted against Combs in numerous civil complaints. For instance, there is nothing regarding minors. You know, there's been a lot of allegations that there were minors at these Combs parties, which we had heard before in these other allegations and these other complaints. Nothing about minors here. Now, Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, said that it's possible more charges could be on the way. He wouldn't confirm it one way or another, said nothing's off the table, so we don't know. But maybe there wasn't enough evidence to prove that there were minors at these parties or Combs did anything criminal related to minors. But I tell you what, we did get a lot more information from another filing from the prosecution. I'll get to that in a second. First, I have to get to the defense, because in a letter filed with the court on Tuesday, Combs' defense team laid out a proposed bail package for their client, why he should be released
this
in trial.
funny.
And they explained why his actions over the last 6 months point toward cooperation, not avoidance. They also call out the government for seemingly making things more difficult than they had to be. His team writes, quote, "Through counsel, Mr. Combs promptly told the government that he had voluntarily come to New York, offered to tell them specifically where he was, and offered to turn himself in at the appropriate time. Even though Mr. Combs came to New York, authorized his lawyers to tell the government of his location, and offered to self-surrender, the government effected an arrest last evening."
That's crazy.
This, we know, is the government's right. However, that he traveled to New York to self-surrender is also something the court should consider. So what is this bail package that the defense outlines? Well, here are some of the main points. One, a $50 million bond co-signed by Combs, his mother, his sister, the mother of his eldest daughter, and his 3 adult sons. That $50 million would be secured by the equity in Combs' Miami home. The appraised value of that home on Star Island is $48 million. So in other words, this is what he's saying. You can secure this. You can know that I'm not going to flee the country. I'm not going to break the bail conditions. I'm putting this home up. The defense says that Combs paid off the remaining mortgage, $18 million, so he could use it to secure a bond. The equity in his mother's home in Miami could also be used as collateral. And the letter goes on to say that Combs' travel would be restricted to the Southern District of Florida and the Southern District of New York. Combs apparently surrendered his passport to his attorneys right after the raids on his home, and several of his family members, including his children, have surrendered their passports too. Combs' counsel says he is currently working on selling his private plane, so he wouldn't be able to just jet off to some exotic locale that has no extradition with the United States. In the bail package information, it's also revealed that Combs wants to be under house arrest and would agree to GPS monitoring. The letter from Combs' attorneys also fires back at the assistant U.S. attorneys working on the case, saying they reached out to him in the days before the raids, but never got any reply. And then on March 25th, agents swooped in with a big show of force, which the attorneys insist was unnecessary.
That's crazy.
March 25th, him in the days before the raids, but never got any reply on the case, saying they reached out.
So he's saying he wants to go turn himself in, but they're saying they were trying to reach out to him days before the raid, and he didn't reply.
But was that before the raid where like they went to go pick him up and arrest him, or was that what they're talking about before the raid in Miami, before he even got before he got arrested?
Nah, I think they're talking about the New York,
and then
because they said he flew to New York.
This ain't New York, is it? No.
This was, but this was,
he said he flew to New York to turn himself in.
March 25th, agents swooped in with a big
March
show of force, which the
that was
attorneys
in Miami at his crib, so he didn't pick up.
Okay, so they
insist was unnecessary. The filing also goes into Combs' philanthropic works, including his work with the Boys and Girls Club of America.
When he probably heard from them, he didn't know what to do.
His donations to open a charter school in New York, and his work fundraising to get PPE for frontline workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. At the end of the document, the defense team states Sean Combs has never evaded, avoided, eluded, or run from a challenge in his life. He will not start now. As he has handled every hardship, he will meet this case head on. He will work hard to defend himself, and he will prevail. Now, the prosecution had a different view. So the prosecution team also sent a letter to the judge defending their assertion that Combs should be locked up with no bail. Their letter states, quote, "As reflected by the gravity of the charges in the indictment, the defendant is dangerous and poses an ongoing threat to the safety of the community. If released, he remains a serious risk of flight despite the conditions offered by his counsel. Most glaringly, the defendant also poses a significant risk of obstructing justice." The letter also goes into more detail about some of those specific situations that Combs was allegedly involved in that point to the lengths he would reportedly go to get what he wanted. For example, quote, "The defendant ensured the victims would participate in freak-offs through coercion and violence. For instance, the defendant provided controlled substances, including ketamine, ecstasy, GHB, to female victims so that they could and would continue to engage in freak-offs despite fatigue, physical and emotional exhaustion, and pain. Additionally, both during freak-offs and separate from freak-offs, the defendant subjected female victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse in part to cause them to engage in freak-offs. The defendant hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged female victims, sometimes by their hair. At least a dozen witnesses will confirm that they personally observed the defendant's violence towards women and or the injuries sustained by women at the defendant's hand." Now, back to that 2016 video that I mentioned of Combs allegedly attacking Cassandra Ventura out in L.A., They say in this letter, prosecution, they claim that Combs used money and influence to try to keep that video from getting out. Quote, when a member of hotel security staff intervened, the defendant attempted to offer their hotel security officer a stack of cash to ensure his silence. After the security guard refused the defendant's bribe, and after coordination between the defendant and his employees, the defendant's staff contacted other members of hotel security. Within days of the incident, the surveillance video disappeared from the hotel's server. Now, this is the exact allegations put forward by Cassandra Ventura, which makes you wonder, is she one of the cooperating witnesses with the government? You have to believe so. And clearly, there is something to be said that the prosecutors here are believing the account of Ventura and possibly these other alleged victims. It's not just them filing a lawsuit against Sean Combs. They are believing these allegations to substantiate criminal charges. That's big. Now, the letter also references another alleged incident that was first revealed in Ventura's lawsuit last fall when she alleged that Combs set fire to fellow recording artist Kid Cudi's car when he seemed to show interest in Ventura. According to the filing, quote, in the early morning hours of December 22nd, 2011, the defendant and a co-conspirator kidnapped an individual at gunpoint to facilitate breaking into and entering the residence of individual one. Multiple witnesses would testify at trial for the events surrounding the kidnapping and break-in, the latter of which is corroborated by police reports and other records. Approximately 2 weeks later, the defendant's co-conspirator set fire to individual one's vehicle by slicing open the car's convertible top and dropping a Molotov cocktail inside the interior. Police and fire department reports extensively document the arson and conclude that the fire was intentionally set. Multiple witnesses would also testify to the defendant bragging about his role in destroying individual one's car. So again, prosecutors really taking Cassandra Ventura's allegations as true. And again, while he's not specifically charged with arson, that is part of the racketeering charge. Goes on, the prosecution, they raised concerns about Combs' access to weapons as well, especially firearms. The letter includes photographs of weapons found in Combs' homes. Again, this is all the reason why they believe he should be denied bail. In March of 2024, during searches of the defendant's residences in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, law enforcement seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s, each with defaced serial numbers, as well as a large-capacity drum magazine. As pictured in a close-up image, the serial number of one of the AR-15s is visibly bored through the story. By the way, that in and of itself is a federal crime. We did an episode about the recent potential shooting of former President Donald Trump. That individual is charged with that crime. The filing goes on to state, quote, 2 of the 3 defaced AR-15s were found in the defendant's Miami bedroom closet, stored broken down in parts, along with magazines that were loaded with ammunition. In addition, 6 legally purchased guns with serial numbers, some of which were stored in gun safes, were recovered from the defendant's residences. Now, from there, in this bail letter, Combs is also accused of trying to influence witnesses. Prosecutors state, quote, specifically following the November 2023 lawsuit, the defendant and intermediaries acting on his behalf reached out to potential victims and witnesses to the alleged conduct, including individuals he did not speak to regularly and had not spoken to in years, to attempt to feed those victims and witnesses false narratives about the defendant's criminal conduct. For example, on or about November 19th, 2023, just 3 days after the filing of the lawsuit described above, this is the Cassandra Ventura one, the defendant made multiple calls to another victim of his sexual abuse and recorded certain of those calls under the cell phone, using the cell phone of a co-conspirator. During the calls, the defendant repeatedly asked for the victim's support and friendship and attempted to convince the victim that she had willingly engaged in acts constituting sexual abuse. The defendant also assured the victim that if she needed the defendant to, she ain't got to worry about nothing else. Quote, even more concerning, since learning about the criminal investigation, including following the execution of the search warrants at his residences, Combs contacted other witnesses on multiple occasions, including other witnesses who had received grand jury subpoenas, basically accusing of obstruction. And other witnesses who had received grand jury subpoenas, basically accusing at his residences. Combs contacted other witnesses on multiple occasions, including other witnesses who had received grand jury subpoenas, basically accusing of obstruction. And by the way, the prosecution also points out that many of the crimes
Diddy is kingpin, bro.
accused of happened in his home. So putting him on house arrest, they would say, doesn't do much to mitigate potential wrongdoing inside his residence. now they talk about the weight of the evidence, how much they have. Remember I said there wasn't a lot in the indictment? Well, here they talk about the weight of the evidence as a factor to consider in whether to deny bail. Quote, as to witnesses, to date, the government has conducted interviews with over 50 victims and witnesses, many of whom saw or experienced the defendant's abuse. Many of these witnesses corroborate one another, and their accounts are consistent with the other types of evidence discussed below. The government only expects that number to continue to grow, given that the investigation, which is now public, is ongoing. And also, the prosecution revealed in its filing that the government has seized more than 90 cell phones, laptops, cloud storage accounts, hard drives, thumb drives, cameras,
how you
and surveillance
keep up with
systems
all
they
that shit,
say
bro?
shows this criminal activity. So based on that, we can
How
assume
you keep up with all
that
that
the
shit?
evidence the Southern District of New York has against Combs
He probably was
is likely
keeping it
false.
as
Quote, the evidence also consists
extortion.
of physical evidence, which was seized pursuant to search warrants executed at the defendant's residences in Los Angeles and Miami, as well as on his person and the persons of certain co-conspirators. In addition to the firearms and electronics discussed above, the physical evidence also includes other evidence of freak-offs, including over 1,000 bottles of baby oil and personal lubricant.
That's
disgusting.
insane.
Now, the prosecution ends
That
their
is
letter to the
crazy.
judge by saying, quote, there are no conditions of bail that would assure the appearance and compliance of the defendant or the safety of others. Accordingly, any application for bail should be denied.
A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York. Second, we are not done. This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly. Anyone with information can call 1-877-4-HSI-TIP. I want to
Shit crazy, bro.
Damn. Bro, they dropped a hotline on, bro.
Over for Diddy, bro.
Cuff Daddy.
It's over for Diddy, bro. You think he should get bail?
I mean,
Shit crazy, bro.
I think he'll get bail. That shit crazy, bro.
he's a little bit cooked right now.
That's a little
grill
bit.
is definitely-
a little bit. No,
The grill is definitely on.
that shit crazy. And it's like, how you come back from that?
He's got a light charge on.
It's over.
It's over for Diddy, bro.
It's over,
Yeah,
it's over, it's over
That
for
shit
Diddy, bro.
crazy, bro.